In Climate Watch, for many Americans, staying home to stop the spread of COVID-19 has meant adapting to long-term telework for the very first time. And while some companies are weighing the benefits of sidestepping the office amid the pandemic, Bloomberg CityLab reports avoiding the office altogether might not necessarily be better for the planet. The recent article by reporter Sarah Holder breaks down the environmental impacts of telecommuting. Sarah joins me from San Francisco to talk about this. All right, so this is really interesting, Sarah. Explain what the climate implications of keeping people at home versus allowing them to return to the office.
Thanks for having me, Vlad. Yeah, so I reported on a climate calculator developed by Watershed Technology, which is a company that helps companies measure their downstream carbon emissions. Companies are not usually measuring the carbon emissions of employee households. They usually just measure what their office consumes. But this tool sort of imagined, what if you really thought about the top to bottom carbon emissions of your employees? Moving to a remote workplace has a lot of implications about how and where people live. One of the biggest ones is commuting. A lot of people think if you're commuting less, if you're moving to a remote workplace, you're consuming less carbon. And to a certain extent, that's really true. You know, the average American commutes an hour round trip to work and back every day. And they consume, if they're using a car to do that commute, they consume about 3.2 tons of carbon a year. But as we've learned this year, there's a lot more at stake when going remote. You're at home, you're using more power. That power might not necessarily be the greenest. You're using your air conditioner all day for just, one person or two people at home. And once the pandemic ends, people might be flying more to meet their colleagues in person if they're in a hybrid or a remote workplace. And then one of the biggest implications that I hope we'll talk about more is whether people decide to leave urban centers if they're able to go remote. So if you were going into the office 5 days a week, you might live in the city center. But if you're moving to a hybrid model or not going in at all, you might choose to go to the suburbs or even change your state location, which has bigger implications for how much you drive, how much you consume, and what your overall employee carbon footprint might be.
So companies like Facebook and Google have pledged to become carbon neutral by 2050, but that only covers their own workplaces. What about the homes of their employees? How would this tool help in that scenario?
Absolutely. So yeah, as I said, that's not usually, you're not thinking about, what do your employees do when they go home from work? Are they driving to the mall? Are they running their air conditioner all day? If you are trying to look holistically, you might want to start looking at those extra emissions, especially because the choices that employers make in the way that they're asking their employees to show up to work or not show up to work really has implications about how they live. There's a great example. For example, in a San Francisco office where I live, say there's 2,000 employees, they're going in 3 days a week in this post-remote future. If all things were kept even, workplace emissions could drop by 13%. There are fewer people commuting in those couple days a week. But then if some more employees move to the suburbs, they're using more power, overall emissions could go 9% higher or 4% higher because people are just living a different lifestyle than they were taking public transit to work.
So how does living in a city compared to the suburbs contribute to the carbon savings of, for example, a remote employee?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest changes is that maybe you're not commuting via car if you move to the suburbs, but maybe your life is more auto-centric. So in that example, maybe your workplace used to be divided pretty equally between urban employees and suburban employees. But if you're giving people this option to work from home, they might be buying a bigger home with a home office. They might be moving into a bigger house. And because of suburban sprawl and because of the more auto-centric lifestyle that is enhanced by the suburbs, it's possible, studies have shown that these households that are in more suburban areas do tend to consume more carbon. So again, it's all, it's based on how employees choose to live their life, how people choose to live their life. But it's more likely that if someone is going to be using the opportunity to move to the suburbs and take public transit less, bike less, and potentially use more power in their home, that some of those energy savings that you're getting in the office are not going to translate one-to-one to the home.
So I guess, what is the solution? Return to work, or to start adopting some sort of a hybrid model, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the things that employees could do is maybe incentivize people to stay in more urban locations, or perhaps just subsidize more public transit more aggressively than parking, for example. Some companies have chosen to provide stipends or discounts for clean power in people's homes, which is not something that folks necessarily would think of or could afford without that boost. Using some of the money, spent for snacks or in-office perks on some of those ways to make people's lifestyles more environmentally friendly at home. And then one of the big ones is also cutting down on flights. So, if you're going to go fully remote, obviously in-person FaceTime is important, but maybe cut that down to 1 or 2 meetings a year instead of 5 meetings a year.
Sarah Holder, really, really fascinating reporting. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.